Hi there. Thank you for visiting my YouTube channel once again. As you know, I've been making videos about The Secret, a Treasure Hunt by Byron Preiss, specifically from my hometown of San Francisco. And in the most recent episode of Expedition Unknown, Josh Gates spoke with the artist John Jude Palancar to ask for some clues about the search, and to which he responded all of this that you see. But I'm particularly interested in the historical part of the clues and the images and verses as they validate and support my own theory here for San Francisco. So in order for you to understand what I'm about to talk about, there's this quick question, as you can read. Who is the elf with the one sequin glove that loved to entertain people by walking on the moon? That's none other than Michael Jackson. So if this example doesn't make sense to you, forget the rest of my video. This is just a quick summary table of all the effort I made trying to come up with the methodology, cookie cutter, so to speak, that Byron might have used. And unfortunately, it's been painful, clearly. So many of these treasures have been missing for the past 38 years. I won't go into the detail here, but you can pause it and read it at your leisure. The first thing that I wanted to establish, at least as a common denominator between all the puzzles that have been found in my hometown of San Francisco, is that they're all within walking distance of water. The majority of the clues also seem to be within these circles, these circle of the sphere of influence, so to speak. And in Chicago, you have your Chicago Water Tower to the north, to the south, central train station. In Cleveland, you have the Terminal Tower towards downtown. In Boston, you have the library, the USS Constitution that's docked across the water. And here in San Francisco, we have Alcatraz, Golden Gate Park, and lastly, Coit Hill or Coit Tower. And I believe Alcatraz and Coit Tower are a combination, but we'll get to that. Okay, so the first puzzle I decided to reverse engineer for the purpose of this video, this project, to figure out the methodology used by Byron Preiss was Chicago. The verse mentions, and to Congress are as known, people accept that as being Roosevelt University. It also mentions Central 2, which most people haven't discussed, I believe, alludes to Central Station, even though it did not exist anymore at the time that Byron would have been there. It is still nonetheless an important historical building that once was central to Chicago's history. So looking at the image, I believe, as a lot of people do, that it is a combination of the Time Bandits movie poster along with Teddy Roosevelt, is what I'm arguing now. And why Teddy Roosevelt? Well, as you can see here, there are three different things in his honor, tribute to him: the Roosevelt Boulevard metro station, as well as the university I just mentioned. What was distinct about Roosevelt? Well, he always wore these glasses with a string, and the troll, Castle Hat Troll, has the string as well, tied to a ring, just like his glasses. He also has what appears to be like a scarf or blouse, something flowy, elegant, underneath his military coat. That, or at least it looks like a military coat to me. Well, Roosevelt was also famous for wearing decorative scarves and ties. That was his signature accoutrement, clothing, whatever you want to call it. And so if we acknowledge that the line Central 2 has to do with the old Central Station building, then how that connects to Teddy Roosevelt? Well, one of his major accomplishments was railroad regulation. The book, I struggle to find anything more clearly connected to him other than the Chicago World's Ferry, which is kind of ironic that it's called World's Ferry after the Chicago World's Fair, of course, is that Teddy Roosevelt was considered a manly man. So yes, he was a sportsman, a hunter. He was strong. He was obviously very powerful, a powerful politician that loved the outdoors. As the book says, he befriended wild polecats. In addition, Teddy Roosevelt is mentioned by name in 3 chapters, which is odd. And so the verse also uses the word rumble, and the Japanese clues, the translator said that one of the clues was the sound of goro goro, gara gara, and so he asked, or she asked, if it had anything to do with trains in Japan, and Byron Preiss says definitely. And so to me, that clearly is a connection to choo-choo. It's also the onomatopoeia. And so what can we conclude from this? Well, Teddy Roosevelt was actually mostly Scottish and Irish, as is the theme of this puzzle, while Ulysses S. Grant, the name of the park where the treasure was found, was actually mostly English and some Irish. So for me, Teddy Roosevelt is a much closer match. Regardless of which guy it is, neither of them had anything really to do with Chicago or Michigan, for that matter, other than attending political conventions for their respective elections, whatnot. So that's odd. There's no real logic to follow here. So moving on to the second treasure found, we go to Cleveland. And in Cleveland, the verse mentions Socrates, Pindar, and Apelles, which are etched into a wall panel in the Greek cultural gardens, as you can see in image 1 there on the bottom left. However, oddly enough, Socrates, Pindar, and Apelles are out of order on the wall panels. Socrates is in the middle, then Pindar, and on the left is Apelles. And so the instructions, the clues in the verse directed the guys that found the treasure to dig behind El Greco. And why El Greco? I believe El Greco is the inspiration for the painting, for the image. He was Greek, but became famous or popular in Spain. And the book does mention, obviously, that there was some Greek fair folk that can be found in art galleries and recital halls and poetry readings and maenads and Greek songwriter Orpheus. So there's a lot that connects it. However, the treasure was not found behind El Greco. It was actually found behind Apelles. And so clearly the instructions were incorrect. So we'll never know if the intended Greek painter was El Greco or Apelles. So moving on to the Boston puzzle, I wanted to throw out a quick side note of some research bits that I found working on this puzzle. The peregrine falcon, which is a dead ringer for the bird in the image, is actually popular or common in Massachusetts, or at least used to be until they almost went extinct. And some restoration efforts began around the time that Byron would have been there. So just thought I'd throw that in there. But more importantly, focusing on the salts find of the treasure hunter that claimed he followed the wharfs from the Columbus statue at Christopher Columbus Park by the water's edge. As you can see on this map of the Freedom Trail that has to do with Paul Revere, there are 6 wharfs on the way to Langone Park, not 5. Therefore, I believe this has to do more with Paul Revere, as you can see in this picture, this painting by Copley, which is the name of the Copley Square, where the Boston Library is located, with the etchings on the wall, and across the street, the church that is in the image itself. So let's match it up. So she's holding what appears to be some kind of jewelry box made of silver. Well, Paul Revere was a silversmith and is holding a silver teapot in this painting. In addition, there are reflective surfaces in both the painting of Paul Revere and the image, and you can see that clearly here. And I've pointed out the specific items that will help guide you to seeing the reflections. So if we do believe it's Paul Revere, from Paul Revere's statue, you would in fact take 5 steps in his direction and arrive at Commercial Street. From Commercial in Hanover, even today, you can Google it, you can see a green tower of lights. at the fields. So, what else? In real life, Paul Revere is believed to have borrowed a horse named Brown Beauty. I like the alliteration there, BB, Brown Beauty. And in the book, the handy manticore rides his horse from house to house, and the horse's name is Hobby Horse. Again, HH, alliteration, and caused a beehive of activity. As we know, the ride, Paul Revere's ride, was to alert people the British are coming. In the Japanese clues, we are told that there were no hints given because one hint would give the whole thing away. Well, that's because the majority of the verse has to do with Paul Revere. And so looking for then sources to get us to Langone Park, it's easy to follow Paul Revere's statue. And when you look at the statue, you see his coat appears to be in motion and matches the fairy, whose dress appears to be in motion. In addition, it looks like a bell is hiding in her dress. This is the Freedom Bell used the Liberty Bell used for illustration purposes here. And guess what? Paul Revere was actually a bell maker. And in fact, there's one of his bells resting outside of his house at the Paul Revere House Museum. So what can we conclude here? There is no logic once again. The theme of the puzzle is Italian, which indeed the treasure was found in an Italian neighborhood named for, at a park named for an Italian American. However, the image was about Paul Revere, who was actually of French descent. So that's odd. Moving on to the San Francisco puzzle, my hometown, I wanted to describe how the image is a fusion of Jesse Benton Fremont, pictured here in black and white, and the Renaissance painting seen on the right. But before we begin, we have to accept that image 1 needs to be reversed. So having the image reversed, we can see that my proposed location is Fort Mason, and where the star is, and to the right is where the cable car turnaround table is, that I believe is a tabletop in the image with the base of a cable car. Across the water is Alcatraz, and indeed the Fremonts here lived at the water's edge on the bluffs with a perfect view of Alcatraz. And this is a view from that top area of Fort Mason. So who were the Fremonts? Well, John Fremont actually coined the term Golden Gate, and they were both politically instrumental in opening trade routes to China. In addition, John Fremont made his wealth off of the gold rush in California. In the book, we have a character named Phantasmaglory, which I believe is about Fremont, Jesse Fremont. In fact, she says, go for the gold, and it says that she will make you, help you get a shot at the vice presidential nomination, which in fact, she helped her husband gain the very first Republican presidential nomination. In addition, as I just said, they lived at the edge of the water on a bluff, and the book says that she beckons you to the coast. So now looking closer at the connection between image 1 and Jesse Fremont, I always found the hand to be quite peculiar, and it's a perfect match for Jesse's hand. So what can we take from this? The sounds from the sky near ace is high. So in a game of cards, an ace can be a 1 or 11. So it could either be about just Jesse or both her and John, since they were both rock stars of their time. They were very popular. They were part of the elite in San Francisco. The sounds from the sky, the Japanese clues ask, is it sounds of birds, planes, wind? I believe the word sounds was used plural to indicate that there are more than one sound. So from where their house used to be, you can hear the sound of boats going by. You can hear the sounds of our usual San Francisco noisy wind. And you can also hear the sounds of people walking by or the people on the boats going by. There are a lot of sounds. It is an amazing acoustic effect if you ever find yourself standing where their house used to be. And lastly, what can we conclude from this? Well, clearly the immigration theme for San Francisco is Chinese, but neither Jesse or John are Chinese. However, I mentioned their trade routes work and opening routes to China. But more importantly, I think it has to do with Frederick Funston, General Frederick Funston, who is the object of Twain's attention. He was stationed there during the recovery efforts for the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. He has gone on record as having been inhumanely treating the Chinese population, which is the reason that Mark Twain disparaged him and despised him for being a warmonger and pretty much just not a good guy. Moving on to Montreal, which was actually the first puzzle I started with 5 years ago, but dropped it when I moved here to San Francisco. I couldn't find yet any associated line in verse 5 for this puzzle. All I could find so far, and again, the various websites, boards, Facebook groups, is that I definitely believe this is a match for John Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada, based on the Rembrandt painting. So image 1 is a fusion of Rembrandt and for the Dutch immigration theme and John Macdonald. Who was John Macdonald? The first Prime Minister that was notorious for being devious and unscrupulous. And so for me, the fingers crossed are alluding to this, that he's sneaky, he's hiding something, which we'll get into in a bit. In the book, the authors clearly describe an elf or whatever that lives in Kingston. John Macdonald, in fact, grew up in Kingston. And so here's the best way to make the connection to it being John Macdonald in the image. The theater masks. Everyone's noticed that half of the face is sad, half of the face is happy. And let's look at the hair. John Macdonald in various paintings and etching. This is an etching. You can see the weird shape that his hair grew in at all directions and angles. It was pretty messy. So for me, this is a pretty close match. I know a lot of people don't believe it's John Macdonald, but I see a very clear connection. If anything, people just need to realize that the image is a caricature of him. And this is a statue that's found in downtown Montreal. And it's also a pretty good match for the color around the image that has these lines weaving in different directions. So, in order to find additional supporting information having to do with Sir John Macdonald, I realized that he was heavily involved with the Canadian Pacific Railway and the Pacific Scandal. This is the reason for the happy sad in the image. So he was Prime Minister, then he was ousted, and then he was Prime Minister again. So what's the Pacific Scandal? Well, it all began with Sir Hugh Allen, who was a financier of the Canadian Pacific Railway. He apparently gave quote-unquote donations to Sir John Macdonald and let his attorney know about it, Sir John Abbott, who happens to be the acrostic in the verse. Sir John Abbott was burglarized, and the thieves found proof that John Macdonald was a little bit corrupt, I suppose, and that's when he was ousted. So all of these characters were involved in one way or another with the Canadian Pacific Railway. The purple are Fathers of the Confederation that supported the Pacific Railway building. Sir George Etienne Cartier helped with passing legislation to move the project forward, while Sir Charles Tupper actually, I believe, managed some of the construction efforts. Then there's, of course, the Lord Mount Stephen, which is the guy the club is named after. And then Sir William Cornelius Van Horn, which is the only Dutch connection I could find, even though he was American, that moved to Canada to help build the railroad. And then James Ross, who helped also with managing the construction of the railway. And these characters their boxes are in gold because they all lived in the Golden Square Mile. Most of their homes are still there, I believe, except for Van Horn's that was torn down for a Sofitel hotel to be built on his land. In addition, Abbott went to school at McGill University, and Van Horn and Ross worked at McGill University. So I don't know exactly what the connection is, but let's jump into who these guys were. So Sir Charles Tupper, as I just mentioned, was the Minister of Railways and Canals, and was instrumental in the Canadian Pacific Railway. In the book, I believe he is the Tupper werewolf that is described as indestructible, that he's made of stainless and heat resistant, immortal, can take on head-on collisions with commuter trains, and doesn't crack under extreme temperatures. That's all steel to me, and railroad tracks are made of steel. Then we have the Lord Mount Stephen, the leg eater guy. He was from Scotland and was the genius behind the CPR, the Canadian Pacific Railway. In the book, there's a character called Union Jack that mentions that the character is of Scottish descent, but lived in British Columbia, and that he is Anglo-Saxon and not Catholic, which is obviously the history of Montreal, where the English-speaking versus the French-speaking clashed. And the book mentions the Vancouver Men's Club, which we just mentioned. Lord Mount Stephen has his club in Montreal. Why I think they focused on mentioning British Columbia and Vancouver is because that's where the CPR ended. It started in Montreal, expanded towards Nova Scotia and on the East Coast, but ended in Vancouver on the West Coast. So moving on to Van Horn, the only Dutch connection, I found a peculiar bit of tidbit here that he actually had a private collection of art that included El Greco, which I just mentioned as part of the Cleveland puzzle, but more importantly Rembrandt, which is the inspiration for the image of John MacDonald fused with Rembrandt. So, having processed all of that information about the men involved in the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway, which included Fathers of the Confederation, residents of Golden Square Mile, and John MacDonald himself, I tried to find a place in Montreal that would tie all of these characters together, as we've proven now that a lot of the characters are surrounding the area or location where the cask is buried. But I struggled. This is a struggle. Clearly why some of these haven't been found after 38 years. But let's begin with the ones that I found that I think are relevant. The first one, of course, as we know, is a leg eater at the Club Mount Stephen, which is at Rue Drummond. Then we have Windsor Station that was built by the Canadian Pacific Railway, as was this tower. In addition, the statue of John MacDonald that closely matches the image is located in front of this building. Then we have McGill University, which is a bit out of the way. And then we have the Place Vigel train station and hotel, which was also built by the CPR, the Canadian Pacific Railway. And lastly, we have this building that is associated with Van Horn, the only Dutch connection to this whole puzzle. I couldn't find any actual clearer connection other than it's situated on Van Horn Street and Park Street, or Avenue, sorry if I butcher that, but this is way out of the way. I don't think it's involved. However, it does have a lot of the imagery. That is an image one with the checkered pattern and the letters within a box. I think it's fascinating. I don't know how relevant it is. So if we continue with the theme of the Fathers of Confederation, the founding of Canada, the early history of Montreal, then perhaps the symbol in the flower is a 7 and a 6 fused together. Personally, when I first saw it, I thought it was a musical note, but I can't connect it to anything else related to that. Perhaps the symbols in the golden square box, besides the X meaning the 10th month of the year, which is associated with the other methodology to the book. It might just mean a railroad crossing. As you can see, the railroad spikes there are a pretty close match. There's also the Concordia Salis, which is the motto, emblem, I forget what specifically, for Montreal. And it also has an X. I really don't know. So lastly, I decided to look at the verse to see if there's any additional clues there. And the Japanese clues, I believe, are probably going to be our best bet for solving this. So if we follow that lead, then lane is a proper title or name. Weight and roots has to do with building structures. A wingless bird is an iron horse, like a motorcycle. So if we continue again with the railroad theme, then perhaps the wingless bird is a train. As you can see here, the front of the train does in fact look like an animal face head, like kind of like a condor, a bird of some sort. That would mean something. It might have something to do with Windsor Station, which is the most popular train station in Montreal. It was actually almost torn down twice, and it's famous as being the hub for immigration into Canada. So then let's look at the specific words that I believe are the ones that need to be deciphered and lined up like a cipher to get the solution out of it. Is lane a train, metro station? Extended to me clearly means that something is reaching out away from something. So perhaps it's a train, metro line that was extended. I know the train line from the CPR was extended from Montreal all the way to Nova Scotia. I forget what city all the way out there, as close to Nova Scotia. Saved. That definitely sounds like it's something rescued, restored, or renovated. As I said, Windsor Station was almost torn down twice, so that was saved. Ascended can also mean take off, accelerate, not necessarily moving up, but just thrusting forward as a train does. A standing member. This is so unusual. Why describe something as a standing member? That's usually used in the context of a club, church, city council, parliament, or even a member of the royal family. I don't know. Paces. Again, in all the previous puzzles, he used the word steps to indicate how far away you need to be from the dig site. But here he uses paces, which to me, again, from the first time I read it, I get the feeling that he's talking about speed, momentum, some kind of fast moving motion. Paces, like keep up the pace. It doesn't mean just step forward. It's odd. And that concludes my presentation. I found this nifty quote from Franklin D. Roosevelt that I think is quite appropriate for this treasure hunt. So, and especially for this video about working on the methodology that, or the lack thereof, to take a method and try it. If it fails, then admit it, as I just did, and try another, but by all means try something. And yeah, I don't know. Hopefully something here in this video will help someone. It'll trigger a thought process, something to help move this along, which was my ultimate goal. And so feel free to leave any comments and I'll respond as I always have. And again, thank you so much for following me and watching my videos, and take care.